All right, everyone, this is the instructions for the neutralization reactions pre-lab. You're going to be using this video in order to complete the pre-lab assignment. The purpose of this lab is to neutralize an acid with a base and determine the mass of salt that you produce. To start your lab, you're going to obtain two pieces of equipment from the equipment station. You're going to grab a funnel and you're going to grab a 500 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. If it's dirty like this, it's totally fine because it's not really going to affect what we're doing. All right, so once you take them to your lab station, what you're going to do is you're going to get your flask and you're going to come to your scale. And what you're going to do is you're going to use this scale to determine the mass of your flask. Now, there are four things you need to keep in mind when you guys are using the scale. The first thing you want to do is you want to zero the scale. Okay, after that, you're going to place your flask on the scale, and then you're going to record the mass of your scale. We'll talk about the other three things that you're going to need to keep in mind when you're using the scale when we get to the chemical portion of the lab. So once you've determined the mass of your Erlenmeyer flask, you're going to put it back at your lab station, and you're going to go to the scale station and weigh out the amount of sodium bicarbonate that you need in order to neutralize your acid. So in order to do this, you have to look at your pre-lab calculations, number 19, where you had A, B, C, D, and E, where you did the calculations. And depending on which acid you're trying to neutralize, which trial you're doing right now, it's going to determine how much sodium bicarbonate you weigh out for this step. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the scale station, and same thing as before, the first thing you need to keep in mind as you're working with the scale is you're going to first zero the scale with the weigh boat on it. Second thing is you're going to take your sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, and you're going to weigh out the amount that you need in order to neutralize your acid. Now, the second thing you need to keep in mind when you guys are working with the scales is that if you take out too much sodium bicarbonate from the container and you put on this, you put it on your weigh boat, you cannot return what you took out back to the original container because it will contaminate it. And so what you're going to do is whatever excess you take out, you're going to dispose of it in the waste container provided to you by your instructor. After also, you're going to make sure that you close the container after each use. Baking soda is a little bit more stable than the other chemicals that we've been working with. Just make sure that you close the container after you're done working with it. Something like that is totally fine. We don't have to be that strict with this for this lab because it's just baking soda. But make sure you try to keep the container closed after each use. You're also going to make sure that you clean up after you finish weighing out your baking soda. If you spill a little bit, just make sure you get a paper towel and you wipe it up. Again, it's your responsibility to make sure that the lab station and the scales are clean before leaving the scale station. All right, so let's suppose that you had to measure out 2.25 grams of baking soda to neutralize your acid. Again, this is an example, so it doesn't mean that you're going to weigh out 2.25, so keep that in mind. But let's just say that you had to measure out 2.25 grams, but you ended up getting 2.27 or 2.26, something around there. What you're going to do is on your data table, you're going to write down the actual mass that you obtained. Not the mass you should have obtained, but the actual mass that you did obtain. So I know the scale is oscillating between 2.6 and 2.7, but it looks like it's a little bit more stable around 2.6, so that's what you're going to write down on your data table for the actual amount of baking soda that you obtained. All right, so once you've weighed out your sodium bicarbonate, you're going to take it back to your lab station. Then you're going to go to your instructor with your flask, and you're going to ask your instructor for your acid solution. Now, it's very important that you know which acid solution that you want from your instructor, as we're going to be doing multiple trials. So go to your instructor with your flask and ask your instructor that you want a specific acid. You're going to ask, can you give me a solution of HCl or HBr or H2SO4. You need to be very specific about what acid you want. So you're going to be looking at your pre-lab and your data table to determine that. But you're going to get your acid solution from your instructor, and you're also going to obtain a balloon from your instructor, and you're going to take it back to your lab station. So at your lab station, at the end of this step, you should have your sodium bicarbonate, you're going to have a balloon, you're going to have a funnel, and your acid solution. All right, so once you've gathered all your materials, what you're going to do is, in order to make your addition of base into the acid a little bit easier, you're first going to take your balloon and you're going to stretch out your balloon and see if you can cover the top of the flask with the balloon. This will just make it a little bit easier for you to add the base into your acid solution later on, because you're going to be stretching out your balloon so that it goes over the flask a little bit easier. All right, after you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to get your funnel and you're going to insert it into your balloon. And after that, you are going to get your base, the sodium bicarbonate that you got, and you're going to be using the funnel in order to get it into the balloon. And so what you're going to do is you're going to put the sodium bicarbonate and you're going to tap your funnel a little bit just to make sure that all of the base has been added to your balloon, and you're going to very carefully remove the funnel from the balloon. And so you should have your sodium bicarbonate, your base, inside of your balloon now. Before we start the experiment, let's talk about why we put the base in the balloon to begin with. If you take a look at your chemical equation, you're going to see that there's going to be a gas that is produced in your reaction. In order to observe the gas that is produced, we're using this balloon to add the base so that we can capture the gas as the equation or as the reaction takes place. So the reason why we use this balloon is in order to observe the gas that is produced in the reaction. All right, so let's add our base to our acid. The way we're going to do that is very carefully. We're going to put the balloon over the container of the flask, like so. And this is the reason why we stretched the balloon out earlier, to make it a little bit easier. If we want to make sure that it's completely over the flask. And then after that, you're going to put the balloon over the acid solution. And you're going to move the balloon in order to get the base into the acid. And as you guys see, it's reacting and there is gas being produced. You can tell by the bubbling, but also by the gas that is filling up the balloon. And what you're going to do is just make sure you try to hold on to the balloon so it doesn't fly out. And then you're going to continue doing this until all of the base is inside of the acid. And after, just to make sure that it's all reacted, you're going to swirl it around. And when you swirl it, you'll see, and hopefully you guys can hear in the video as well, you're going to see that there's even more reaction taking place. So what you're going to do in order to make sure that reaction goes to completion is you're going to swirl your solution around to make sure that all the bubbling stops. All right, so you're going to come to a point where there is no more bubbling, even if you swirl, and you guys should see that there are no particles left inside of the flask, right? It's just all completely clear liquid now. Now, in order to make sure that the reaction has gone to completion and you've put all the base in the balloon into your acid, what you're going to do is you're going to just slap the balloon, you're going to tap it just to make sure there's no base in there. So you're going to slap it around, and if there is no base falling into the solution, that means you know that all of the base has been transferred from the balloon into your acid solution. All right, so after that, what you're going to do is you're just going to very carefully remove the balloon from the top of the flask. Now, the reason why we want to be careful as we do this and as we deflate our balloon, we want to deflate it very slowly, is first, we don't want the balloon to fly away and hit something. But also, we want to make sure that if there's any leftover powder in there, it's not going to spray out and it's going to make a mess and it's extra work for us to clean up. So we're just going to very carefully deflate the balloon just to make sure that none of the base in there comes out. And then we're just going to leave the balloon on the side because we're going to use it again for our future trials. All right, so this next step might not apply to everybody, but let's just say, for example, if you had some particles left inside of your solution, in order to make sure that they're all dissolved, we're going to use a squirt bottle in order to add water into the solution. Now, we don't need to do it for this trial because if you look, there's no particles inside of your solution. But hypothetically, for some people, there might be some particles still left in there. If that is the case, then you are going to add water, and then you're going to swirl it around in order to make sure that it all dissolves. You want to add very little amounts of water because the more you add, the longer it'll take to boil off your liquid, which is the next step. And again, not everyone's going to have to do this, but if, for example, you have some particles left in your solution, then you will have to add water with the squirt bottle in order to make sure they dissolve completely. All right, so once we've ran our reaction and made sure that all of the base has dissolved in the acid, we are going to take it to a hot plate now. Now, the reason why we're taking it to a hot plate is because we want to figure out how much salt we created inside of our solution. And the way to do that is we have to boil off the water that's inside of the solution. So all we're going to do is very carefully put our flask on a hot plate. You're going to take your flask to the hot plate station your instructor has set up for you, and you're going to place it there. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. It is very hot. You guys can see already that the water is starting to boil inside of the solution. So just make sure that you're very careful as you are working with the hot plates. Remember which hot plate you put your solution on. That way you don't take somebody else's. And just keep in mind, once the liquid starts boiling, and especially when it's boiled off, your flask is going to be extremely hot. So make sure that once you put your flask on the hot plate, you don't touch the glass anymore. Once you need to retrieve your flask, you're going to talk to your instructor, and your instructor will personally take it off for you, and you're going to cool it down before you move on to the last step of the lab. All right, so while you are waiting for your liquid to boil off on the hot plate, just want to mention to you guys, this might take a significant amount of time, depending on how much water there is inside of your flask, and especially if you use the squirt bottle in order to add more water, it might take a really long time, upwards to 20 minutes to boil off all the water. Now, during that time, we don't want to waste our time. We want to be mindful. What we're going to do, there's two options. First, if this is your first trial or your second trial, you're going to want to start a new trial, right? You're going to get a new flask, weigh out NaOH for a different acid, ask your instructor for another acid solution, basically run a different trial of the experiment. That way you have that second flask ready to go to heat up as soon as your first one is off the hot plate. So the first thing you can do is start your next trial for your lab. The second option is you can work on your post-lab calculations. There are a lot of calculations for this lab, and so if you are done with your other trials or you want to just work on your calculations right now, you can work on your calculations as you wait for the liquid to boil off. All right, so once your liquid has cooled off from the hot plate, what you're going to do is you're going to go talk to your instructor, and you're going to ask your instructor to remove the flask from the hot plate. Now, this part's very essential that you're not the one doing this. Talk to your instructor, and your instructor will get your flask with a pair of tongs, and then your instructor will place it on the lab station in order for it to cool. Again, just remember, your flask is currently still really, really hot and will burn you if you touch it. So as you are waiting for it to cool, make sure that you guys turn off your hot plate if you're not going to boil off another flask. And what you're going to do is you're just going to make sure that nobody else touches it, because hot glass looks the same as cold glass, and we don't want anyone getting burns in this lab. So just make sure that you do not let anyone touch it, and you're going to wait until your flask is completely cooled. All right, once your flask is completely cooled, and by cool we mean that you can hold it with your bare hands without getting hurt, you're going to place it back on the scale, and you're going to find the mass of that scale. And by using this, the number that you find here, subtracting the mass of the original flask, you will be able to calculate the mass of the salt that you produce in the reaction. Okay, after that, you can fill out your data table, and now you should have all the numbers on the data table for one of your acid trials. Okay, you're going to be repeating this experiment 5 different times. The reason why is because we are going to be working with 5 different acids, and so you're going to repeat this trial at least 1 time for each acid. If you believe that you can do a better trial and get a higher percent yield, you can do a different acid again. Again, you just need to ask your instructor for the acid that you want to neutralize.